And the next speaker is Reshaad Shah. He's the CEO of SqwidNet. As CEO of SqwidNet, Reshaad is entrusted with building an IoT connectivity business in South Africa in partnership with global IoT network operator Sigfox. He also serves as Group Chief Strategy Officer at Dark Fiber Africa. I'd also like to thank SqwidNet for sponsoring this event. Without your partnership, this wouldn't have been possible. Thank you, and please welcome Reshaad.
Thank you, Abby. So today, I think what we're going to talk about is how we think IoT is shifting our reality. So I'm going to make sure maybe you switch on one of these two mics. I think both are on. Thank you. And I think we're going to start talking about this shift in reality from the perspective of what actually happens in the natural world. And if you think about while countries, continents, societies in general may govern themselves through policies, laws, resolutions, there's a specific underlying law that doesn't actually change. And that is the law of nature itself. And ultimately, that law, which is a universal one, transcends geopolitical boundaries. It transcends social boundaries to a very large extent. And the laws of nature are quite prescriptive in that we cannot change them. And if you think of this prescriptive law that we talk about, every natural element in the world, in the environment, the resources that are out there, the animal world, the plant world, the human world, is all subject to these laws. And looking back at history and looking where we are and looking into the future, the laws of nature can be summarized very, very simply in 2 words. It's actually more a statement of you either adapt or you die. Okay. So it sounds a bit grim, but ultimately that's what governs all of us and governs the world in its entirety. The Earth itself has gone through a significant amount of dramatic change over its existence. And only a fraction of species have survived into the following era. And what I mean by that is, in fact, if you just look at the following era that has dramatically spawned species, ecosystems, and environments, they've just been remnants of the previous age that have always been retained in its next evolution. Now that tells us a couple of things. And of course, we are looking at a much broader period of thousands of years where this evolution takes place. But that remnant that flows through to the next age, it's an interesting one to see whether we as human beings are part of that remnant that flows into the next evolution of the planet. And we currently face accelerated rates of change in every facet of life. And as we know it today, and unless we find a smarter way to deal with these accelerated levels of change, our existence and that of our families, of society, and the world as we know it is under threat. Bringing that back to Africa as a whole and where we are today, our continent's population has grown by 2.5% over the last 5 years or so. And that means with that growth rate, we're expected to reach about 1.3 billion people by 2020 on the continent. That will make up about 17% of the global population. Now, in the same period, of course, you could imagine that with this growing population, they need to be served in some way or form. And specifically from a food production perspective, we have to try to understand what's happening on the continent from food production. And one of the things that you're seeing already is that there's an expectation that food production is going to decline by nearly 50% over the next couple of years. And couple of years meaning over the next 3 to 4 years on the continent. And that's driven largely due to 2/3 of arable land being destroyed or not existing anymore. Part of it is driven by climate change, but I just heard as of yesterday that climate change is not an issue according to the US government, so maybe I have to update this, but from the data we're seeing, climate change does have an impact, but it doesn't affect the whole world, it only affects Africa. Now, if you think about this loss of arable land over the next couple of years, and that prediction is over a slightly longer period, longer as in 8 years, so by 2025, 2/3 of this is expected to be lost. It does mean that we have to find a much smarter way on how we sustain the growing population on the continent. And we have to adapt current agricultural methods to ensure that the yield and efficiency levels in food production are accelerated to meet the needs of a growing population. Because if we don't actually accelerate that production demand, if we don't do things far more efficiently than what we're doing it today, we'll not be able to feed the continent. Forget about connectivity, forget about broadband, forget about ultra-narrowband, which is actually what we're going to talk about, I think, today. Or at least that's what our stand is going to talk about, ultra-narrowband. So forget about those connectivity issues if we can't feed the population, because it's a much bigger and much more dire issue that the continent faces today. The other area that's severely under threat is the health of the population. And Africa is by no means immune to pandemics that we have witnessed and the impact that it has had on both human, animal, and plant life. So whether it is Ebola, HIV, swine flu, malaria, cholera, these are just some of the scourges that had and still have a significant impact on the population of the continent. And it's a devastating impact in that. These strains in any one of these diseases, as well as the new ones that are coming up, are constantly mutating and at a rapid pace. So our ability to track and monitor the conditions and the environmental contexts that cause them to thrive is actually the most critical factor that's going to enable us to contain these outbreaks in the future, and thereby helping us to mitigate the devastating socio-economic impacts that they have on society. So the health of the continent. So the first one was the growing population, as well as the food production and being able to feed it. The second being the health of the population. And the third is rapid urbanization. Now, as Africa grows to become more prominent on the global scale, on the global stage from an economic perspective, people will constantly want to participate in this economic I don't want to call it a boon, but this economic opportunity, if I want to call it that. And the rapid rate of expected urbanization does pose a serious challenge to cities who have to find smarter ways of managing the natural resources, the infrastructure, and the services that it needs to deliver to its citizens. And that's a real difficulty that cities will find themselves in, and they find themselves in it today. By 2050, which is not that far away, it's expected that 80% of South Africa's population is going to reside in the city. So our current cities will need to cope with this dramatic shift in its population. It would have to enable services. It will have to cope with the demand. Well, I mean, let's look at where it is today. Today, all of our cities are struggling to cope with that demand that the citizens are placing on them, because the resources are just not there. They're just not enough sufficient resources to cope with it. Now, how do they do that in 20 years from now? And to impact it 20 years from now, it means you must start executing on plans today, because infrastructure takes a very, very long time to build, manage, and operate to service a demand that's coming in the future. So it'll be good to have a look around around our cities to see what developmental plans are in place, the long-term plans that are impacting what's going to be required in 20 years from now, or 30 years from now for that matter. So we will have to adopt a drastically different approach in which services are managed and delivered in a contextual manner that ensures much more efficient and sustainable allocation and utilization of these scarce resources. And it's a tough job for our city managers and for government in general. And there are some saving graces, like some just-in-time principles that could be applied to utility management. But we mustn't forget that this resource is still relatively scarce. So you can only manage so much from a principle perspective that helps you to better utilize whatever those resources are. But to enable what we could term a smart city is not necessarily one that is fully connected, but definitely one that is managing its resources in a smart way. So I want us to extract the word smart from smartphone and don't think of smart city as the smartphone city. It's actually a smart city being able to utilize its resources, service its citizens in a way that is well thought through, that is smart, that is taking care of the future of what that resource is going to look like. But having said that, every component in the value chain in that smart city needs to be connected in some way or form. And serving up real-time contextual data, if not real-time, at least near real-time contextual data that, when it's collected, it's able to be analyzed and to allow us to manage the delivery of services in the most efficient way. Now, if you look at each of those three areas, maybe four, so population growth plus food production that's going to happen over the next couple of years, the health of the citizens on the continent, as well as the rapid urbanization, there is a common thread that runs through each and every one of those that highlights something for us quite significantly. And that is that the same old way of doing things are not going to deliver on the future demands that Africa, its growing population, and global participation is going to have on it. And that's an important item for us to reflect on a little, to understand that how do we make sure we're taking care of all three of these areas while servicing the needs of today. So we know what this future demand is going to look like. We know what we need to do today, which is servicing today's demand. But it's important to try and understand the context of what anybody is doing, whether and it's not necessarily government's role in its entirety. It's really up to the citizens of that of the continent, the businesses of the continent, the multinationals that are working in the continent, and some of these we'll talk a bit about later of what some of them are doing. But it's not enough, and that's clear because we're seeing the scourge of disease, we're seeing malnutrition, we're seeing no nutrition to a large extent, and we're seeing rapid urbanization that's putting a significant amount of pressure on the resources of the cities. These resources are highly limited, and in order to do something that's going to impact on it sustainably, we have to have accurate, near real-time, maybe real-time information that will enable us to manage, allocate, conserve, and utilize these resources at levels of efficiency that are significantly higher than what we see today, and what we experience today, and what we're doing today. And that's the big shift that we're really talking about here. It's actually having to shift how we operate, whether it's a country, it's a city, it's a business, it's an industry. We have to shift how we're actually operating. And of course, while the platforms for data analytics, artificial intelligence, application development, service delivery, have been maturing over the years to enable this new data and contextual-driven model for service delivery, one of the major challenges has been, how do I reliably, securely, cost-effectively connect the device, connect the thing in Internet of Things? How do I do that? And that's an important aspect because whether it's an animate object or inanimate object, you want it connected securely, you want it connected efficiently, you want it connected with the lowest possible price point, you want it with a low power footprint as well. And when you visit the SqwidNet site outside, that team will tell you how we're helping to solve that together with Sigfox globally. So I'll skip that part. But it's important to know that connectivity and specifically connectivity targeted at IoT, custom built and servicing IoT in a cost-efficient, low-powered way is starting to be done. And we'll talk a bit about that as well. But it doesn't just stop there with the connectivity, right? It's really about how this data needs to be consumed and utilized across an ecosystem of devices, platforms, applications, and third-party systems to create, manage, and utilize these resources at unprecedented levels of efficiency. So if you think about an IoT ecosystem, it needs to be created that, one way it produces a conducive environment for all stakeholders, and this will include the device manufacturers, it include developers, service providers, system integrators, to actually enable what could be termed an intelligent city. Intelligent city is the upgrade from the smart city. It's one that says, yeah, I'm doing things smartly, but I'm doing things intelligently in a way that allows me to be sustainable, allows me to better utilize my natural resources, allows me to better service my citizen, that I'm using what's at my disposal. And that ecosystem that brings us all together is one that needs to be created, but to an extent, we're quite fortunate in South Africa in that we're already seeing quite a significant development around how this ecosystem is coming together. And irrespective of the connectivity provider, whether it's a Sigfox connection, whether it is another narrowband IoT connectivity platform, or whether it is 3G, LTE, any one of these connectivity platforms, all of them play a role in this connectivity ecosystem. It's the device manufacturers, the connectivity guys, the analytics platforms, and importantly, it's the software and data analytics layers that actually bring the true intelligence of this connected environment across multiple verticals that allow us to do something intelligent with them. And wrapping around this whole thing is the security of it. I think where we are in the world today, if you don't have multiple levels of security, whether it's a connectivity network, whether it's the cloud analytics platform, you need to take care of it from the ground up. So at a design level, security can never ever be an afterthought in the world that we live in today. It has to be done and built inherently in the design. And that's where, to a very large extent, Sigfox is able to bring some of that power. It's that security, that multi-level security from the device that connects all the way through to the network layer and back into the cloud infrastructure that provides it to your customer. We've partnered with Sigfox globally to build out initially the network in South Africa. And this network today is currently being built, and it's being built very much on the similar standards that Sigfox has rolled out in 32 countries globally. It's covering 1.9 square kilometers today and have over 500 million people under coverage. It does a couple of things. The first thing that it does, it's enabling a low-cost connectivity platform. It's built on an open access basis. So SqwidNet, which is the network operator in South Africa, is an open access provider. To a large extent, we've pioneered open access as DFA. So some of you might remember DFA, which is the largest open access network operator in the country, delivering this massive fiber network. And we've pioneered it. Pioneered it back in 2008 when I'm sure some blue papers were still being worked on before we get to the green papers and then the white papers, etc. But it's definitely one that we've pioneered and we've seen the benefit of it. We've extended that model into the IoT network where it's being built on an open access basis, and actually every Sigfox network operator globally is built on an open access principle. The other power that we get from a Sigfox network is its long range and its reliable security around that connectivity platform. So we're building this network at quite a rapid level. We expect to have just over 85% of the population covered within the next 12 months. That means that we're building at quite a rapid rate. Today, our coverage, when you visit the SqwidNet guys outside, they'll show you what our coverage map looks like. We cover every single major metro in the country. So all major cities are already covered under our network. We are focusing heavily now on all of the major roads, freeways, cities, smaller towns, and extending that coverage so that we cover the population of the country. And that's actually the model that's being rolled out with all Sigfox network operators globally. And that's how come you already have the largest IoT network live today. And you can go have a look at some of the devices that we're playing with. But ultimately, IoT offers us a new way, or a way to leverage technology to address the key issues facing the continent in a much more efficient and sustainable way. It actually offers us a way to address the management, allocation, and management of resources, limited and scarce, to deal with the needs of the growing population, the growing global participation of that population, the growing levels of urbanization, the health challenges that the continent faces. And IoT actually opens up new ways of dealing with issues in a predictable, proactive, and data-driven manner, which offers us new possibilities to adapt and new ways to create a sustainable future. Because if you think about what we started off with, that the laws of nature govern what we do on this planet. So you either adapt by shifting, because the alternative to adapting is not actually an option for us. And it's actually up to us all to impact on what we do on this continent, in this country, and actually globally as well. Thank you very much.